Hello and welcome to The Walker. I am Henrietta Holdish, Chief Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague Amanda Hunt, Head of Public Engagement, Learning and Impact, and we are the co-hosts of our twice annual community receptions, which celebrate openings in our Burnett Gallery like tonight's event.
Before we begin, I'd like to ground us all that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the contemporary, ancestral, and traditional homelands of the Dakota people. This site was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, and it holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in our community today. We are thrilled to have you all here this evening to celebrate the opening of Jessi Reaves, Process Invented the Mirror at the Walker Art Center, which is curated by our boss, Executive Director Mary Cerruti. It's our great pleasure to acknowledge the generous supporters of this exhibition, Edward R. Bazinet Charitable Foundation and RBC Wealth Management. We are also grateful for additional support from Justin Beal and Jane Haight, Marguerite Steed Hoffman, Myung Lee and Neil Simpkins, and Sarah Miller-Meigs.
And also really big welcome to the artist friends and family who've really traveled from all over the country to celebrate with us tonight. We also want to thank our incredible staff, which includes our stellar installation and registration teams, along with curatorial fellow Laurel Rand Lewis. And we also want to acknowledge Whitney Terrell and her contribution to the exhibition.
Born in Portland, Oregon in 1986, Jessi Reaves studied at the Rhode Island School of Design. Her work has been showcased in numerous prestigious exhibitions, including the Whitney Biennial and the Carnegie International, and is held in the collections of the Brandhorst Museum in Munich, the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and the Walker, among others. Process Invented the Mirror marks the artist's first solo museum show, featuring a suite of new pieces that span a diverse array of media, which includes sculpture, video, and a large-scale mural and curtain installation. Framed within this quasi-historical environment, the works invite viewers to consider questions of value and creative labor.
And Jessi will be in conversation with Mary Cerruti, exhibition curator and executive director of The Walker. Mary has been the director here since January 2019. Before that, for almost 20 years, she was the executive director and chief curator at Sculpture Center in New York, where she shaped this incredibly influential exhibition program, which of course explains her affinity for sculpture in general and for Jessi's work in particular. Mary really has too long a track record of exhibitions and public art commissions and distinctions to name here, but I am going to mention very briefly that in July 2021, she was awarded the honor of being named a Knight of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French Ministry of Culture, which makes her the second Knight on our staff.
We had to get that in there.
Yeah.
Following Mary and Jessi's conversation tonight, our friends, chefs Amy Thielen and Kristen Taborski will introduce the second part of this evening's celebration. But for now, please join me in welcoming Jessi and Mary to the stage.
Well,
Hi.
It's so nice to see everybody. Thanks for being here. I am super excited to open this exhibition tonight, and I really want to echo Henrietta and say it's really great to give a very warm welcome to all the friends and family and colleagues who have come from both near and far to be with us tonight, because it is an exciting exhibition, and I think it's a testament to people like me who have been following Jessi's work for a long time and excited to see this next evolution in the practice. So I'll start by saying I met Jessi about 10 years ago. As Henrietta said, I was director and chief curator at Sculpture Center, and we had this sort of small, awkward space that the curator at the time, Rubika Trieb, and I decided we should make it into like a really tiny project room. And Jessi was the first artist we invited to do that. And she showed 2 sculptures. And I think that was simultaneous with your first show with Bridget, if I'm correct, in 2016.
Yeah, I think it opened maybe a couple months before.
Oh, maybe,
6
yeah,
months
maybe not
before.
exactly simultaneous, but around the same time. And of course, she still shows with Bridget Donahue Gallery. She's here tonight too. And I guess what I would say is that I was initially drawn to the work. I am a sculpture person. I confess, like I am drawn to sculpture, but I was particularly drawn to Jessi's work in its sort of refusal to be exactly sculpture nor furniture, and I think that the way in which she was both playing with, in a really rigorous way, both the idea of furniture and the idea of sculpture, but also design and art history, and all of those things in a way that wasn't particularly reverential, but also was not like intellectual critique of those histories or those objects and things, but more just really a rigorous engagement with those ideas and those histories. And I think that is a real strength of the work. And we'll talk more about what I mean by that, because that's kind of the heart of what we'll talk about, I think. So it's really a true pleasure to watch that work evolve. Before we jump in, do you want to say anything? Or should I just start asking you questions?
Sir, Mary, Cerruti. I'm going to have to hear more about that later. Did they touch you on the shoulder?
They did not, but I do have a
crest.
Yeah.
Wow, exciting. I also want to
medal.
say thank you to all my friends and family and colleagues for coming, and for everybody coming to see this talk. I'm kind of overwhelmed and flattered by the audience. So, yeah, we can
jump
dive in.
I'm going to say that we have some slides, and we're not going to do a slideshow and talk necessarily directly about the slides. I mean, Jessi might decide she wants to talk about something specific, and we can try to illustrate it.
I have a laser pointer.
And you have a laser pointer, which is always fun to use. But I wanted to have some slides just in case, if some of you have not been in the show yet and you don't know the work, it would be helpful to have a little visual cue and reference to, so as we speak, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, pictures help.
So although I said we weren't going to start by talking specifically, I do just want to point out that the piece in the upper piece, the shelf piece, Bad Apartment Shelf, is in the Walker's collection. It was acquired a couple of years ago. So the Walker's relationship with Jessi started before the show, and we're excited to have it. So we'll scroll through some images, but we're not necessarily going to. Hopefully, they'll help enlighten what we're saying. So I think we should start with where almost everyone starts, and maybe it's where you start in terms of process, is the fact that the work you're using found objects, often specifically furniture, and it's both sort of subject and material, and it's sort of an obvious fact when people are looking at the work. So where does that come from for you? What's that motivation? How did that get you started?
Yeah, I think I had always felt there was a lot of sculptural potential in furniture, which probably starts like longer ago than you guys want me to go, or like psychoanalyze myself. But when I went to art school, got the privilege to go to Rhode Island School of Design. So there's kind of already maybe baked into that institution this kind of binary between art and design, and that struck me as really interesting. Like, you kind of had to choose a side. You were either going to be over with the designers and kind of like in this sort of like, I don't know, the sort of more practical space, I would say, or you were going to be over with the artists and kind of living in this like cerebral world of ideas. And so I think that's maybe the first place that the binary between those things really jumped out at me. And that's maybe where I started to feel kind of the early potential of combining these two ideas. I had tried.
You didn't want to pick.
I didn't want to pick, no. I think I told my parents I was going to do something very practical. I was like, I'll do textile design. And they're like, that's a good idea. And then I ended up studying painting because that was where a lot of the working artists who were traveling back and forth between Rhode Island and New York taught in that department. And I was really, drawn to that idea, and it just felt like there was more freedom and more experimentation there. But then when I moved to New York, I also, sewing was kind of my first sort of sculptural medium, I would say. It was really something I was drawn to naturally, and my mom grew up, in the kind of 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s lineage, sewing a lot, making costumes and clothes, and so she taught me, basic sewing, and then I kind of quickly went my own way with it. And so upholstery was sort of a place that I felt like it was a practical application for sewing. So I wound up doing freelance upholstery when I moved to New York. And it was kind of through those conversations that I learned, I guess, how people express their identity through the design objects that they aspire to or possess or aspire to possess. And that was kind of where the conceptual beginning of the work grew out of, was really hearing things these people were saying. And I was like, well, where does that come from? And, why does it, just simple things. I worked for a designer for a brief period of time who was like, I want to make an iconic chair that has an iconic profile, like an X. And I was like, oh, why, just these kinds of ideas started to emerge, an X is a serious and a masculine shape. And then, something like a heart or a star is kind of something that's put in this other category, this kind of feminine adolescent category. So things started to emerge also through material hoarding, and just having, I was lucky to have a free studio in New York through someone that I worked with. So I had a space to kind of hoard materials. And I'm the type of artist, somewhat unfortunately, it feels sometimes that I just have to have a space where I can kind of collect things. Like you mentioned, the found objects that I often start with. It's hard for me to start with a totally blank canvas. I mean, I don't work on canvas, but it would be hard. Yeah. So that's my.
So there were lots of things in what you just said that we could go in a couple directions. So
Yes.
I'm sort of debating about what should we talk about first?
Yeah, anything.
I think maybe because you brought up the gender part, we could talk a little bit about that, because I think that is something that people respond to in the work, and the way in which certain activities, certain shapes, as you say, and forms and materials are gendered in these ways. And my impression, and you can correct this maybe if this seems off, is that, especially in the earlier work when you were working with really iconic mid-century forms, that those were very much about the rational, masculine, put it out in the world, as you just described. It's those are iconic forms that demonstrate a certain thing. And, you think about a bachelor pad, and that's chrome and black leather and things like that. And then you might have, chintz and silk upholstered couches, and that seems like a feminine form. And in this show in particular, it seems like you're playing with some of those where the ornamentation is taking over, which is also considered more formal. I don't know. I don't want to say taking over. That's a little extreme, but is played up more rather than the dissection of the masculine. But it's more about the ornamentation has a more forward presence.
I think I let some. I guess early on in this making work in this vein, I kind of felt that it was important, and I still kind of strive for this tension within all the objects. How do I get to this place in each work that has this kind of strange productive tension? And so, you could kind of look at the masculine, feminine as this this big binary that we live with in a lot of ways in our lives. So I think sometimes that one comes to the surface pretty quickly, the idea of ornamentation versus simplicity. So I'm often looking for them to kind of, arrive at this very awkward productive, tense place. And I guess, yeah, in this body of work, I kind of let things go a little crazier than I might have in the past, which is just part of making work over the course of many years, and an exciting thing to play with.
Okay.
We might come back to
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
that
we'll
too.
come back. Yeah, it's hard to say it all.
Because I want to sort of get to this show, Process Invented the Mirror. And when the first studio visit I did with you after you agreed to do the show, you shared with me that you had started to research and look into WPA, that WPA moment and WPA murals. And I immediately perked up and got excited because, as many people here might know, the Walker was founded in 1879 by a timber baron, but in 1939 was sort of refounded as the Walker Arts Center, which was funded by the Federal Arts Project, which is part of sort of that WPA moment and federal funding for the arts to create multidisciplinary arts centers throughout the country, in between the coasts. And that was a moment where the Walker family, we had a collection, but the Walker family was starting to pull back from funding the entire museum, and so the federal government basically came in and helped relaunch this institution as the Walker Arts Center as part of the WPA moment. So that just seemed like a fortuitous, sort of confluence of events that you were starting to think about this at this moment that this show was going to come up. And it makes its way into the exhibition in maybe not, in some obvious and some not so obvious ways. So do you want to talk a little bit about your interest in that moment and history?
Yes. I think I got the chance to kind of start to explain this to you the other day, because I think sometimes I feel the need to clarify what research might look like in my practice. I don't know that it always looks exactly like it looks in another artist practice, but when I heard about the opportunity to do the show, it kind of just had this idea of having murals in the space, which was sort of an idea that kind of came into the room it was like a toxic gas. I couldn't get it out, and it was just sort of this omnipresent idea. And so a lot of times, I guess when something like that happens, you kind of have the opportunity to either turn away from it. I mean, not understanding it fully. Why is this the idea of what I want to do for this show? Why is this the kind of backdrop that I'm interested in creating? When you have the opportunity to do something like the space, the space is essentially a white cube with a white terrazzo floor. It's is that the space I want to make sculpture and show sculpture in? So I had this other idea, and I started thinking about, where does that come from for me? So the experience of seeing a lot of these WPA murals over the course of my life in different spaces like post offices, and I had the opportunity of going to a lodge in Oregon growing up that was built by the WPA and features some of these murals and carvings and a lot of original artwork. And I kind of realized through thinking about that that's maybe where I first started to understand the value around artistic labor, and that people can and do value artistic labor, and that it's something we can, it's something worth pursuing in life, in spite of its impracticalities. So yeah, that's kind of how the research started to unfold. And then in terms of the selection of the mural, I wanted it to refer to the materials in the work. So I knew I wanted to choose a mural that either had to do with the kind of mining of steel or milling of lumber. And so that there's an amazing website that the government has that shows state by state where all of these murals are located, and really has an extensive archive. So it was pretty easy to access and comb through and choose and kind of find what mural might what mural might resonate with me to bring into the space. And then also sort of an opportunistic idea, because the Walker has this incredible team and ways of executing things that I don't have the resources to do just in my own studio as one person. So I tend to kind of see that when I'm out seeing works in museums of my life, a lot of sort of techniques repeat. I'd see artists do similar gestures in the space over and over again, whether it's, building pedestals. It's not a criticism. It's just like, oh, that's what we do to the space as artists. We paint the space black if we want it moody, or, and I'm guilty of that too. Like in the image here, this was my second exhibition at the gallery Bridget Donahue, that I work with in New York. So second time doing a show in the same space, the question arises, like, do I want to do something to manipulate the space? And if so, what to do? So in this case, I made a kind of strange version of the sunken living room, which had also kind of emerged out of, my version of research, which is, it's pretty like, I would say I do like lazy research. Like I kind of find my way to something. I'm like, there's ideas here. But I had read one book by an author, and then I found my way to her second book, which was called Playboy Modernism. And it really gets into Playboy's relationship with modernism and how they advocated for the international style as designing this kind of new masculine interior. And so for the first time, I'd been drawn to the sunken living room. I mean, it's just a cool looking thing to do to a room, but also never really understanding, like, what does it mean? And so in that book, she's kind of laying out the way that American values went from these very kind of are illustrated in the idea of the sunken living room, going from this very upright, rigid, formal dining room where you're sitting across from your family and friends and interacting in this very formal and proper way, to this kind of reclined sunken living room atmosphere where you might be laying down and interacting in maybe a slightly more casual way. We'll keep it at that. It appealed to me.
Well, I think just to sort of draw some parallels, because I think the WPA moment too, it's the intervention in the space picks up on and echoes and reinforces some of the things what the sculpture is doing in terms of a reference to a time period as well. So I think the way you just described that moment in the 70s and the reaction to sort of modernism, the 30s and 40s were sort of coming out of an Art Deco moment, which had a different relationship to nature and the built environment, and but also then WPA is like this, as you said, the valuing of creative labor, that like,
and the handmade
and like how things are made and what they're made out of, and honoring that representationally through the murals was like and I want to add another thing, because I think the other thing that comes up in this show and that is that these like the sunken living room is a very much a domestic space, and I think what's happening in this show is quite interesting because a lot of the objects seem to be domestic objects. Like a vanity tends to be in a private space in someone's room, not even in a public area of their home usually. Yeah. It tends to be a pretty private space. But then the environment that's created between the mural and the way it's painted and the register of the wall suggests a more institutional space. So you've kind of hybridized this sort of...
Yes. I mean, I get to say pretty early on in figuring out how to put these sculptures that I've made as a group into a room and make an exhibition, I kind of felt like there's always this sort of persistent problem of, if they're arranged in a certain type of space in a certain type of way, they easily conjure the domestic. Mm-hmm. Or if they're kind of arranged in this other more blank space, in a different type of way, they look like the furniture showroom or sort of a retail environment, which I guess neither is ideal. I'd prefer more, I guess, confusing backdrop or association. So I'm always sort of striving to evoke that. And so, yeah, with the placement, the height of the curtain, for those who've seen it, if not, you will see. It's sort of, we went for sort of I think I talked to you about this maybe in the first studio visit, this kind of municipal dimensionality, like when you have a high traffic area or an area or a school or a, public building, they often do something to the wall at this very specific height because that's where things get scraped against the wall and that's where the wall gets damaged. So it's sort of a way of making it easier to preserve the presentability of the space, I would say. And then I wanted to, not just to mimic that one-to-one, but to do something different with it, with the curtain, which brings in, another texture and this kind of feminine materiality. Yeah, I can keep going, but.
Okay.
And you'll also see some interventions on the wall that suggest that the wall has maybe been painted or repainted, or there's been some sort of renovation. But it's not explicitly cited what's happened there. But the feeling that this space has kind of gone through and continues to go through changes. Like, what is the curtain doing exactly is maybe just a question that it asks by being there.
Yeah. And in the same way, I think a lot of the work has evidence is not quite the right word, but it's the suggestion that it's had a life before. I mean, this is like all found objects suggest this, obviously, but I think the way that you bring them together and work with them, reminds us that all these things have a life. Like all objects have lives, prior lives, and whether something's worn, like a seat cushion has been worn and it gets worn down because it's had an interaction with a body and it comes through time and place and history, and it doesn't exist in a vacuum and it didn't come out of nowhere. Somebody made it and then somebody engaged with it, interacted with it over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting. I think what's interesting there is like, we have this kind of internalized like fear of the blemish on surfaces, like particularly furniture. It's like you want them to be impenetrable and last forever, and that's kind of, why maybe it's a little bit off-putting or disgusting to see like a leather surface that's kind of like cracked and splitting apart and like seeing the foam that's underneath. So I think I'm intrigued by that kind of repulsion and working with that. I had another idea, but now it's what I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind. Remember what you were saying?
I was thinking about the lives of objects.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I bring a found object into the studio and, kind of evaluate it in its current condition, nothing's ever really wrong with it, right? Like a broken object kind of comes in on the same level as maybe something that would be collectible to another person. And I kind of like when, I like that my studio is a place where all these things kind of exist on equal playing field. And maybe I would cut something in half that would, like, somebody else would not.
Yeah. I think that's definitely
and then
true.
I might elevate and use like a, make a broken part of something sort of a center focal point in a sculpture. So it's, the kind of a simple way of explaining a little bit of my process.
But it brings in that idea of, like, from a viewer perspective, the way that whether, as you said at the very beginning, about how, like, what we choose to surround ourselves with and make, and and ultimate and customize are all sort of expressions of who we are, who we want people to believe we are, and how we create those environments for ourselves is that reflection of ourselves. And that customization, like whether it's like you got your Noguchi coffee table so everybody knows you have good taste, or whether you're plastering stickers on your bookshelves as a teenager, like those are all equally valid decisions in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of we definitely live in probably, I don't know how to say this. I guess early on in kind of figuring out, well, I don't know. I guess I would just say we live in the age of Etsy. Like we live in a time in which customizing things in your home is sort of encouraged in one sphere. And you could look up a tutorial to do anything like that. So I'm always kind of cautious of, I try to work with things in a way that's not just that, where I'm getting
definitely.
into why, what is the kind of thinking behind painting an object over and over again, like to match your personality. I don't know. I'm kind of losing the plot.
Okay, well then let's again go back to the show in particular, and talk about the title.
Okay.
So, because the title brings us, I think, two things, something we already talked about a little bit, and brings in another thing, which is, so the title, Process Invented the Mirror, is, as you explained it to me, a misremembering of a quote from a William Faulkner novel, Sanctuary. And the original quote was, nature invented the grape arbor, but progress invented the mirror. And you
Remembered it incorrectly.
remembered it as process invented the mirror, which is, fair. So I think to my mind, when you think about that quote, we can talk about title. There are three things we could talk about. We can talk about that relationship of nature and the man-made, which I think is within this conversation also about like sort of modernism versus Art Deco and things like where those aesthetics come from, the masculine, the feminine, all of that.
Yeah, I think the process of titling the exhibition is something that's always a real challenge for me. It's hard for me to find language that stands in for the group. And because of the way these things work and press and the need to sort of announce the show and different things like that, actually the title had to come before even a lot of the work existed. Yeah. So that's always just a true challenge in making a show. And I tend to keep the way I work with, I like to title my work. I think it's an opportunity that we have as artists to add another layer. And I've had some, experiences seeing artworks that had titles that, stay with me just as much as the impression, the visual impression of the artwork or the experience of being in front of it. And I love the way that title and artwork can interact and undermine one another or add this other layer. So it's something that I try to keep up with. So I keep like a running list of titles that I'm, often are coming from things that I'm reading or things that I overhear people saying. And I try the way that I work with titles, I try to write them down in the moment because I find that if they leave so quickly. And so this was kind of a happy accident that I didn't do that. I bought this book at a garage sale. And then I don't even know that I finished reading it. It was good though. What I did read was good. But I was like, what was that they said? And then I wrote it down and when I went back to look at, I was like, oh, that could actually stand in for the whole group because, I don't think I have to explain the title that much. I think does what words do.
But it actually is an example, I think, of the way you use language too, because you're kind of, there's a parallel because you're using found phrases and words as your titles, and we're not going to give too much away about the video that's in the show. Well, there are two actually, but the one in the main space also uses sort of found audio and shot footage. I think that and the sort of mismatch, like as you were saying, like the relationship between the language and the words and the images creates a gap or creates a slippage that allows for other things to come into play.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think a lot of the titles that I keep they're sort of extractions. It's not the full sentence. It's like, well, what does it mean when you pull this one little part out? And the audio for the video is found audio from a PBS television show called History Detectives. And I guess it's the second work that I've made in this style where really the starting point for the video is editing the sound down to the sound of one thing that existed. So in the first video I made, it was a feature-length movie called The Women. And so I edited that, and that's a remake of a remake of a remake. A play that was made into a movie that was made into another movie. And so in that way, there's sort of, I guess it's nice with art. You could take any sound you want, and it's copyright free. So you have that kind of freedom to play. But with that, I edited it down to 10 minutes, and then I start shooting the footage and editing the footage to the audio, and then the audio changes again. And this video uses the same process. It's just much shorter because I used a episode of a television show. And, in the same way that the titling, just certain phrases, I guess, jump out at me and are like, this is the right audio to use. So I guess if you listen, you could listen for, I think the first one that maybe jumped out at me when I was working on this video is this line, the fabric is like the skin. Yeah. And I guess I can reveal, in the television episode, they're talking about fabric that's been stretched over the wing of an airplane. But
you're giving it away.
I take it back. I don't know what they were talking about. But this is a good moment to use my laser pointer here.
Talking about skin.
Yeah. So this is a early work of mine from, I think, 2016 called Little Miss Attitude. It has two titles. Night Cabinet, Little Miss Attitude. And so this is one of the earliest works experimenting with this idea of slipcover as sort of a protective element in furniture that is usually incredibly precise and meant to be removed and put back and, did I say protective? As a protective element. And so in this work, the fabric is like the skin. No, it's sewn so tightly over this plywood form that it can't actually be removed, which was a technique that I saw people doing with clothing. Like they would sometimes people in my high school would wear jeans and then they would stitch them up with dental floss to make them super tight. And then at the end of the day, you would cut the dental floss in order to get the pants off. And I always just really loved that technique, and that's really where it came from. And then you have this kind of erotic way of opening and closing the cabinet, which is with zippers instead of doors.
Do you want to? So the other thing that's in the title is about mirrors, and we'll let viewers find the mirror in the show. But I think that, and mirrors in art, art historically, there's all this symbolism around mirrors as, a symbol of vanity or a symbol of self-reflection or of a reality that's not quite there for us. You want to say a little bit about how you think about the mirrors?
I guess I went back and forth as to whether there should be a mirror in the show at all. I haven't made a lot of works with mirrors. I think there's some objects that sometimes I feel like they're so psychological that it's just low-hanging fruit. Like, I've never made a bed, for example. It just feels like maybe someday. And then I think I like the mirror contained within the object of the vanity. Again, it kind of has this language element, like the object is telling you something about what it does and how it's meant to be used right off the bat, which appeals to me. And yes, so there's one mirror in the show, and it has a modesty flap that it's sort of, well, we could maybe talk about movability. So there's
We have a few images from work in the show
Okay.
that we can start to.
Cool.
Oh, that's a past work that I love.
Skip. No, just kidding. Okay.
Here's a vanity.
Yes. So, this is a vanity that doesn't have a mirror, but it has this sort of center area that's been painted and foiled silver. So it sort of alludes to the idea of a mirror without actually being reflective. And I guess mirrors are interesting because they exist in any reflective surface, but the kind of product, the idea of a mirror, polishing steel to a mirror finish. There's many ways to make a mirror. Mm-hmm. And so, I think reflection comes into play in the show in several works. The television monitor is called Reflection in Black Plastic. And so that sort of refers to maybe this experience of catching your reflection in something like the television screen when you're not expecting it. Sort of disturbing experience, possibly.
And where you sort of see through things and see other work through another work, it's like that that experience of both reflection and translucence, or transparency, is interesting. That you also play with the curtain in terms of opacity and transparency. And
oh yeah, that's true. I tend to like plexiglass for several reasons, but I like that it's in many instances it's pretending to be another material. So I often use this one type of plexiglass that is not in this piece per se, but the gray plexi in the back of this, I think originally is like trying to look like a smoked mirror. Mm-hmm. But there's one type of plexiglass that is tinted green to look like glass. So there's always kind of this hovering in between of like, is it glass or plastic? And it's much easier to work with than glass. You can cut it. It's a material that I kind of try to, sort of remove from the typical way that you would see it used in art, or maybe the most familiar way, which is, what the material does best, which is make these beautiful, precise vitrines and boxes, and it's meant to be cut at a right angle and glued to its other piece and have this perfect seam. So I sort of try to bring that material into the studio and just treat it like a sheet of plywood and cut it with a jigsaw, and even let the little off-cut pieces be used and treated like they can be a part of the work. Like it doesn't have to conform to this, to the sort of expectations, the typical expectations of the material.
Okay. There's lots more we could talk about.
Yes.
But we're kind of getting to the end of our hour.
Oh, that went fast.
It is going fast.
We want to talk about. Okay.
What do you want to talk
choose.
about? You tell me what
choose.
you want to talk about.
Well, maybe we go back to the bachelor's stool, because
Yeah.
I think one thing that maybe is unique about this body of work is a lot of things do have moving parts. So the bachelor stool was a object that I encountered when I was researching. I had just had to bring a stepladder into the studio to get something, and I was like, interesting. I never quite looked at that, like, for what it is. So I was like, is there, a stepladder that I would want to work with? And then I found this category of object, which is called the bachelor stool, which was an object designed for men living alone for the first time. So it goes from ironing board to chair to stepladder with the manipulation of laser, this little toggle here. So you turn that toggle and you slide this apparatus and it can transform between these three objects. So pretty much immediately I was like, this object is trying to do so many things, and it's just the perfect thing to bring into the studio and try to work with. So I had one, and one wasn't enough, so then I got two. So there's two versions of it. But similar, you can't actually manipulate this bachelor stool anymore to do all of these things. So now it's kind of frozen in one of its functions and in its kind of new sculptural reality. And I think there's a lot of places, whether it's doors that open and close, even though you can't actually interact with the works, they want me to tell you that. You can't touch them. A lot of things pivot on Lazy Susans, so there's different versions of. Can I go forward now? Mm-hmm. Now I'm just clicking. This work, for example, it was really convenient when we photographed it because the upper section just rotates on this sort of lower base. So if you had this in a space, you could turn it and, live with the back or live with the front, or maybe kind of in the way of like a hidden bar, you could sort of pivot it around if you didn't want people to see what was inside of it. And again, with this work, it also opens and closes. So there's a lot of things like that. And I guess it's sort of an experiment in how much the viewer is able to I don't know, I guess like internalize the potential of these objects without, like, because it would come up quite often in the past, like, do people have to sit to really experience your work? If you can't sit in the chair in the exhibition, is it really, is the idea of sitting on the same level as actually sitting?
Yeah.
And so I think movability is maybe a way that I'm experimenting with that here.
As potential also. Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you. I appreciate your generosity of sharing all of your process and ideas and
Anytime.
And with the work. I'm going to ask Megan Leafblad to come up. We are going to move into the second part of our event tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Megan's going to introduce the next part, and of course, we're going to have a reception up in the Cargill Lounge, and of course, Jessi will be there. So if there are questions from the audience that, we had so much to talk about, if there are questions, informally, we'll be upstairs, and there will be an opportunity to chat. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jessi. I'm jealous of your high school experience. No one was sewing their pants with dental floss at my school. Thank you also, Abby and Alex, our interpreters for this evening. I have a few little logistical bits before Amy and Kristen join me on stage. But as Mary said, I'm Megan Leafblad. I'm the Associate Director of Public Engagement. And as far as bosses go, my boss is Amanda, her boss is Mary. That's the hierarchy here. But as Henrietta and Amanda said, this is considered a community opening. It's something we do twice a year. And what makes it unique is that in addition to opening a show in the Burnett Gallery, we do it on a Thursday night. Thursdays are always free here at the Walker from 5 to 9. And we followed the artist talk with a reception. And we invite a local chef or chefs to think about the work that we are presenting, ideas that inspire them, that resonate with the way that they work. And we also invite you all to join us in having a beverage. When you walked in, you got one of these tickets. And if you bring this ticket to the bar, we would love to host your drink. There are wine, beer, other choices. So if you did not get one when you got in here, you can grab one from one of our ushers on the way out. The other little housekeeping bit is that you're going to head up the stairs and take a left. And there is another set of stairs or an elevator that will bring you up to the Cargill Lounge. And it is right outside of the show, which is lovely. So if you haven't been to see it yet, you can pop in there. You can visit Amy and Kristen. You can have a drink. And as Mary said, we hope the conversation can continue. I think those are all of my bits. So I want to ask Amy and Kristen to come down. And I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then they're going to tell you a little bit more about what they've prepared and how they've thought about the food for this evening. But Amy Thielen is a 2-time James Beard award-winning writer, cookbook author, and chef. Her books include, if you don't already own them, you can find them all about town, but the New Midwestern Table, her memoir, Give a Girl a Knife, and most recent, Company, The Radically Casual Art of Cooking for Others. Her cooking show, Heartland Table, ran on the Food Network from 2013 to 2015, and now she is hosting a podcast called Ham Radio. I believe it's a few episodes in, and it's wonderful. There's also a live on-air cooking show in partnership with KXE and KBXE, Northern Community Radio, out of Grand Rapids, Bemidji, and that is where Thielen lives with her husband, Aaron Spangler, who is also an artist, and their son, Hank. Kristen Taborski is a Minneapolis-based chef with roots in fine dining, a love for collaboration, and a style that leans light, bright, and artfully composed. Her career has included work in restaurants, like running the Lynn Hall and the Dakota Club, among many others. Also private events, catering, cooking classes, and culinary consulting. These women have done a lot. Always with a focus on thoughtful, expressive foods. Thielen and Taborski have teamed up for multiple events together, fundraisers. They really enjoy cooking together and bringing folks as we celebrate art, artists in our community. So I'm going to let them talk, and after they're done, we invite you to join us.
Hi. We're thrilled to do this. I think, yes. I think it's very easy to say that we are. We've had a really good time doing it. Thank you, Amanda Hunt, for asking, and Megan and Mary and everybody here who has, at the Walker, has made this such a fun process for us. We do love to do things together. We could speak a little to that collaborative process, maybe. I think that we were really inspired. I mean, this is when you're looking at work that lends itself to thinking about flavor, texture, color. I mean, it's quite lovely, really.
Yeah, we had fun thinking about building on flavor, obviously, and then building also on texture and structure. So you'll see in some of our bites, one of them specifically, we played with gelatin, something firm on the base and a little bit loosey on top. Also with pastels and color.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the base, one of the bites, it's in the middle. We call it the cup, but it really doesn't have a great title for us. Okay, it's a corn panna cotta. And on top of that, which is like a really silky corn custard, and then on top of that, we have a tomato aguachile. Tomatoes, I mean, this is the week. Everything's lovely. It's very simple, and everything is from the market, and it's been a joy to source things. And so the tomato top is a little bit spicy, and then we have little floating cubes of compressed honeydew melon and cucumber. So kind of like but the colors, we were thinking about you. And then there's a BLT, which is like our take on it. It's very micro. So it's like a little cube of sourdough, bacon mousse, and a tomato and some micro lettuce. And then you want to tell them the last one?
Yes, and more layers. We did a take on baklava. It's a savory but sweet baklava. It's made with caramelized onion and Swiss chard, and topped with almonds and ras al hanout and fried thyme.
Yeah. So if anybody's can't do seeds or nuts, there's 2 out of 3. Sorry about that. Yeah. But yes, we hope you enjoy. We're happy to see you all up there. And congratulations to Jessi, this great show. Thank you for having us, everybody.